प्रतिबोधिताम् भगवता नारायणेन स्वयम् व्यासेन ग्रथिताम् पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीम् भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावः दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धम् गीतामृतम् महत् वसुदेवसुतम् देवम् कंसचाणूरमर्दनम् देवकी परमानन्दम् कृष्णम् वन्दे जगद्गुरुम् भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनिमीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण महनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलम् गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानककेसरम् हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम् लोके सज्जनषट्पदैर्हरः पेपीयमानम् मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजम् कलिमलप्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूकम् करोति वाचालम् पङ्गुम् लङ्घयते गिरिम् यत्कृपातमहम् वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यम् ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः सुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यम् सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम् योगिनः यस्यान्तम् न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः। ज्ञानम् पार्थाय प्रतिबोधिताम् भगवता नारायणेन स्वयम् व्यासेन ग्रथिताम् पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीम् भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावः दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सस्तुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण महनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैर्नदी कैवर्तककेशवः पाराशल्यवचः सरोजममलम् गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम् लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमलप्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः सुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः।
पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्, सर्वस्तरतु दुर्गाणि, सर्वो भद्राणि पश्यतु, सर्वसद्बुद्धिमाप्नोतु, सर्वत्र नन्दतु. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato ma Satkamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we will take a look at some of the important themes that occur in chapter 5. And chapter 5 begins with a question, a doubt in the mind of Arjuna. Let me read the verse number 1. Sannyasam karmanam Krishna punaryogam cha shamsasi yachreya etayorekam tanme bruhi sunishchitam. Arjuna said, renunciation of action, O Krishna, thou commandest, and again its performance. Which is the better one of these? Do thou tell me decisively. So we see that Arjuna's dilemma and doubt continues. We saw that there are two things that Krishna asked him to do. When Arjuna confessed to Krishna that he was confused, he didn't know what to do, Krishna began by drawing Arjuna's attention to his real identity, to his true identity as the Atman. And that's what we saw in the first part of chapter 2. The characteristics of the spirit. Then in the second section of chapter 2, Krishna then points out that Arjuna should work to do his duty, but without calculating his own self-interest in it. He should continue to do his duty selflessly. Work hard, but not seek its results. Now these two things, are they two separate things? Are they two alternatives that Arjuna could do either this or either that? Or are these two things connected? That's been the question not only in the mind of Arjuna, that's the kind of question we face even today. Especially those amongst us who have begun to take a deep interest in spiritual life are often faced with this dilemma. How much of my time and energy should be given to my secular activities, work, responsibilities, and how much should I give it my attention to my spiritual life? Is it either or situation? In some sense, it does seem to be that way, because the time and energy that are available at our disposal are limited. So if I give more time to one, I naturally have to give less time to the other. If I give more energy to one, there'll be less energy available to the other. So there does seem to be a tension between these two. So when Krishna asks Arjuna that remember your true identity as the Atman, that seems to be primarily an internal activity of self-remembrance, of letting go of these false or misguided notions about ourselves and holding on to the truth within. On the other hand, Krishna is also asking Arjuna, now go and fight the battle. Now clearly, you can understand Arjuna's dilemma. He says, one way you are asking me to do this, you're asking me to do that. Now just tell me one thing that I need to do. And then Krishna will say in the second verse that yes, that both of these, the path of action, the path of going and carrying out your duty selflessly, is as effective, as important, as powerful, as capable of taking you to the goal as the path of knowledge. When you go away from all activity and focus your attention on the truth within your heart. And then he says, but among these two, in the second verse, see the second line, tayostu karma sannyasat karma yogo vishishyate. That of these two, the performance of action is better than the renunciation of action. So clearly here, Krishna seems to be showing his preference for doing karma yoga rather than an exclusive path of knowledge when you are away from activities. Now, I need to say something about why does this conflict even originate? Why is there a conflict between jnana and work? Why can't both of these things be done together? Because sometimes in life we do see, even those of us who are interested in looking at the philosophical aspect of religion, we do go about doing our day-to-day activities. We do carry out our duties and responsibilities. And then when it's possible, when we have the time, we study the Upanishads, we study the Gita and say, I am the Atman. And the rest of the time, we are busy doing other things that are required of us. And why should there be any conflict between the two? Now, if we don't look at the two things deeply enough, there's probably no conflict. But on the other hand, if you look at what each of these requirements expect of us. So when I look at myself from the path of knowledge, I'm essentially saying I'm the Atman. I'm infinite, I'm all-pervading. I was never born, I'll never die. And so there is really if you're all-pervading, if there is nothing that exists apart from you, there is no action possible. Because in order for any activity, there has to be the subject, there has to be the object, there are the action connecting the subject with the object. There has to be some kind of multiplicity. There has to be some duality in order for action to occur. Now, you can think about it this way. In a relative sense, in our own experience, there is activity during the waking stage. Clearly, we see lots of action going around. There is activity even during the dream stage, because again, there are this dream world and the dream people and there are dream objects. But there is no activity in the deep sleep stage, because there is nothing. There is no tangible duality present in the deep sleep state. So there is no activity possible there. So the reason for conflict between knowledge and action, between jnana and karma, is knowledge requires of me to say, I'm not the doer. I don't do anything. And work is not possible unless I feel in some way how is a work possible? How can any work occur unless there is someone doing the work? And so it seems as if an agent of action is necessary for action to occur. And that is the reason the two cannot go together. Because jnana, knowledge says, I am not the doer. I am the infinite. Work requires that I am the doer, because unless I have that sense that I am doing something, why would I even go forward and do it? And that's the reason for the dilemma in Arjuna's mind. Now, what Krishna is saying here is that doing work is better than giving up work. And it will become clear why would Krishna say something like that. But I would like to say something more about giving up work. Giving up work is not about just sitting doing nothing, because we cannot do nothing. We cannot not work. It may be possible, even for that matter, actually, we cannot sit still for an indefinite amount of time. If you just say, I'm just going to sit physically still, after some time, the body is going to move a little bit. There's going to be some activity. Even if there is no external activity, there is already internal activity still going on. You cannot do anything about it. There is breathing going on. There are these internal bodily processes going on. We don't want them to stop. And we are just talking about the body. But think about the mind. One of the reasons we find meditation difficult is because the mind doesn't become still. The mind is running about here and there. So if the body is still, the mind is active. So it doesn't seem as if we have much choice about not doing things. What Krishna seems to suggest, and that's the overall principle that Krishna follows throughout the Gita, and that is that everything in life doesn't necessarily have to be an either-or situation. Why not find a way through which both may be possible? Why not find a way by which, rather than seeing the path of action and the path of knowledge as two competing, mutually contradictory paths, why not look at them as complementary, that they somehow support one another, that it's possible to do both? And then the question is it possible to do both? One way of looking at that is this, that unless I have fully attained the knowledge that I am the Atman, that I am not the body and mind, that the body and mind are only my instruments, the selfless work that I do will necessarily be imperfect. It's not going to be perfect. But just as in life, we don't stop doing things just because we are not able to do them perfectly. We keep doing them, however imperfectly, with the hope that with the passage of time, eventually, our imperfections will become less and less and less, and we will eventually be able to do it perfectly. Similarly, in the path of knowledge, while it may be relatively easy to understand the truth that I am the Atman intellectually, to hold on to that insight every moment of our life is not easy. When you're reading the Upanishad, when you're reading the second chapter of the Gita, we can kind of think, yes, I am the Atman. But then once it's time for lunch or dinner and you are hungry, or you have to rush out to get something or attend to some deadline, then the idea of the Atman just disappears. So it is possible to say that unless my heart is completely purified through selfless action, through the path of Karma Yoga, I'm not going to be able to hold that experience of being the Atman for a sustained amount of time in my heart. So in some sense, our practice of jnana is going to be imperfect, and the practice of Karma Yoga is also going to be imperfect. And for spiritual seekers, it's fine to be able to do both these things as best we can, even if imperfectly. that is where regularity, sincerity, faith come into play. Even if I'm not able to do these things perfectly, but I'm sincere, I'm earnest, I'm regular, I do these things with faith, gradually our imperfections begin to disappear. The more my heart becomes pure, the more I'm able to hold the knowledge that I am the Atman. And the more I'm able to hold the knowledge that I am the Atman, the easier it becomes for me then to do every action in the spirit of yoga. So these two practices, rather than seeing them as mutually contradictory or mutually conflicting, can in fact be mutually supportive. So the first thing we need to recognize in life, especially in spiritual life, is that we don't have to stop doing things just because we are not able to do it perfectly. Because sometimes some of us do feel, oh, I'm so exhausted today, the quality of a meditation is not good anyway, but I'm so tired that it's pointless for me to just sit and try to meditate because I know today I won't be able to meditate. And so let me not do it. Bad idea. What Krishna's implying here is, even if I'm not able to do something perfectly, an imperfect practice of prayer, worship, meditation is better than no practice. Because if I keep on doing it, over time my imperfections will go. And so that is why, look at now the verse number 3. That's very important. Jneyasa nitya sannyasi yo na dveshti na kankshati nirdvandvo hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchyate. He should be known as a constant sannyasi who neither likes nor dislikes. For free from the pairs of opposites, he is equally set free from bondage. He is easily set free from bondage. This phrase, Nitya Sannyasi, is interesting and important, both. Sannyasi is the one who has renounced all engagement with the material world. Sannyasa, the one who has let go of all these bondages, all these strings that ties one to the material world. That's why the word sannyasa means. And when we realize that it's our connections with this perishable material world that is the cause of all the pain and sorrow in our lives, then who wouldn't want to snap connection with it? And yet we know that not everyone can and not everyone does. So what is it that determines who will be able to become a sannyasi and who will not or who cannot? So even the dilemma that sometimes spiritual seekers have about whether I should give up all connections with the material world or not, that dilemma is also connected in some ways with this conflict between knowledge and work, between jnana and karma. You might remember the kind of feelings that M had in his initial visits to Ramakrishna, in the first part of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, when Mahendranath Gupta, the one who wrote the diary, which is now become the book called the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that he goes to Ramakrishna, and then in the initial visits, when Ramakrishna asks him, "Who are you? Are you married? Do you have children? What are the works that you do?" and so on. And looking at Ramakrishna's reactions to the answers that M gives, that yes, he is married, he has a family, he has children, he is working, he somehow begins to feel that he could have done better in life, that the choices he made, that the cards that were dealt to him were not the best. And it becomes even more that feeling when M sees some other disciples of Ramakrishna come around him who had not gotten into the kind of entanglements he had gotten into, who Ramakrishna praised as being that these are the people who are ready for renunciation, and so on. So M then one day asks Ramakrishna, he says, what is it that determines who will become a sannyasi and who will not? What is it that determines who will take to monastic life and who will not? Now, superficially, it does appear that snapping off one's connections with the material world needs a tremendous amount of detachment, tremendous amount of dispassion, and those who are not able to do it will not be able to do it. They somehow fall short of having that great detachment, that great dispassion. That might seem to be the reason. But that is not what Sri Ramakrishna said. When M asked him, what is it that determines who will take to monastic life and who will choose to live in the family, Ramakrishna simply said, that is the will of God. And I think those words should be taken to heart. What it does mean is that merely taking to the life of monasticism is itself not an indication that one has completely snapped one's connection with the material world. Just as if someone doesn't become a monastic, that itself is no indication that this person is extremely attached or extremely entangled with the material world. So the external circumstances, whether someone is living in a monastery or a convent, or someone is living with the family, does not indicate who that person is or what that person is capable of doing. So Ramakrishna told them that there are two kinds of yogis. He called them Gupta yogi and Vyakta yogi. Gupta yogi means hidden. Gupta means hidden. So hidden yogis. And Vyakta yogis means yogis who are visible, or yogis who are not hidden. What Ramakrishna meant by that is that detachment is necessary for spiritual life, period. There is no option. So no one can say, oh, I want the world and I want God at the same time. No, doesn't happen. That's what Jesus meant when he said you cannot worship God and mammon at the same time. That is what the Vedantic analogy of the rope mistaken for a snake means. That you can never see the rope and the snake at the same time. If you're seeing the snake, you cannot see the rope. If you're seeing the rope, you cannot see the snake. So if what we are looking for is both I don't want to give up the world, but I also want God. We are maybe just fooling ourselves. Or we can have a kind of a superficial religion when one feels, okay, I'm doing something for my spiritual life. I go to a temple or a church or a mosque, I say my prayers, and I feel good about it. But then I also have all these, I know that the things in the world are as important as these things. And so if I try to keep both of them on the same plane, it's not impossible, but what it means is that my life is going to remain quite superficial. My spirituality will be superficial, and my worldliness also might be superficial. In short, I'm going to be a superficial person. Or one of the two might be more. So there are some people who are very worldly, but they also have some interest in religion. So their worldliness is heavier, and an occasional interest in spiritual life kind of makes them feel good. And the reverse is also possible. So there are some people who are primarily interested in spiritual life, but who may not have succeeded or may not want to snap off their worldly connections. So there are all these permutations and combinations possible. But at some point, if you want to get out of this superficiality of life, we'll have to eventually, consciously or unconsciously, and consciously is what works best, choose what kind of a life we really want. One has to be authentic, and either I can be an authentically worldly person or I can be an authentically spiritual person. An authentically worldly person will have a worldly mindset no matter where that person goes. Even if such a person were to go to a place of worship, even if this person were to pray, what this person prays for will affirm, will show the worldliness of the person, not the spirituality. On the other hand, if someone is authentically spiritual, even if this authentically spiritual person is still in the world, still engaged in what seems to be a secular activity, but the way this person does this externally secular work will show that this person is authentically spiritual. So even secular work can be done with a spiritual mindset, just like religious activities can be done with a worldly mindset. That is the significance of this verse number 3. The Nitya Sannyasi, what is non-negotiable in spiritual life is this internal detachment, with this internal dispassion. There is no option regarding that. Externally, whether that inner detachment and dispassion should manifest externally, and usually that means taking formal vows of monasticism, going to stay in a monastery or this. All of that will depend, Ramakrishna said, on the will of God. There are many, many, many people who have amazing detachment. They're truly monks in every respect, monks or nuns in every respect. But for factors beyond their control, they could not be monks formally. And there are also, we see, cases of people who might have taken externally the garb of a monk or a nun, or a garb of a religious habit, a religious robe. But internally, if they have not that detachment and dispassion that is required to go with it, then they become the hypocrites, which is so much a problem. So just as there are hypocrites among the worldly people, there are also hypocrites among people who want to present themselves as religious or spiritual. So hypocrisy in any form is problematic, and that's the health of any community, the health of any society is measured by how many authentic people that community or society has, and how many superficial or hypocritical people it has. A lot of times, people may not be consciously hypocritical, but unconsciously an inauthentic life is a life steeped in hypocrisy, but maybe a person is completely unaware of the contradictions in their life. So what Krishna is saying here is two things. If I want to be truly a spiritual person with complete inner detachment, external detachment, as we saw, is in the hands of God. That's not so much in our own control. What is within our control is what is happening inside me. And for that, there are just two things. Yo na dveshti na kankshati. If I can eliminate all dvesha, all hatred from my heart, and akanksha means hope or expectation. So, just two things. If I can eliminate these from within me, I am already a sannyasi. I'm already a real, authentic spiritual seeker. And as I've sometimes suggested, it might be good occasionally to ask oneself, what are the things I hate in life? What are the expectations I have in my life? Make a list if you want, or you can either do it mentally or put it down on paper or do it on your computer with a password protected document if you want. But it's good to have that list and then look at that list occasionally. And the longer the list, it is an indication that I have a lot of work to do. But if I look at that list occasionally and say, if these are the things I hate, why do I hate them? What are these biases and prejudices in my heart? And it may be possible that through discernment, through prayer, I might be able to see how futile, how nonsensical, how shallow many of our biases are, our prejudices are. And when we find that they are just so childish in many ways, or so pointless in many ways, we might be able to strike them off the list. Same thing with regard to expectations. The more the number of expectations we have from the world, from your country, from your government, from your family, from your friends, the more possibility there is for me to get disappointed. And if someone can say, I don't expect anything from anyone, and if that list of expectations, if I can cut it down to zero, the list of my biases and prejudices, if I can cut down to zero, you will see that life will change for us. The conflicts that people have, the kind of conflict that Arjuna had, should I do this or should I do that? All of those things will go away. We'll acquire a kind of clarity by which Krishna said, Nirdvandvo hi mahabaho sukham bandhat. Such a person will go beyond these pairs of opposites, beyond these polarities of life, and become free from bondage. We'll see these kind of very practical tips sprinkled throughout the Gita. They are not all put in one place. They is not put in a form of list 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But you'll find the gems throughout the Gita. And so here is this one gem. I love this verse because it gives me a clear path forward. Look into my heart, find out how many expectations I have. Look into my heart, find out how many prejudices I have, and work on eliminating them. And if I can do that, I can be enlightened. So that's the first thing. And if I can do that, if I want to do that, and when I do that, this conflict between whether I should practice jnana or should I practice karma yoga, all these conflicts will also go away. If I become a true spiritual seeker in the sense Krishna describes it here. Look at verses 8 and 9. I'll just read the translation. The knower of truth, being centered in the self, should think, I do nothing at all, though seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, going, sleeping, breathing, speaking, letting go, holding, opening, and closing the eyes, convinced that it is the senses that move among sense objects. This is another one very, very practical and helpful tip. To remember to be a witness rather than a participator. And we have seen this on earlier occasions as well, that when we watch a movie and you're sitting on your hardly any of us goes to see a movie in theaters outside now. Most of us are able to do it just at home in the comforts of our own home. But if it's a well-made movie, in the beginning, I know I'm watching a movie. But if that story is absorbing and there is good acting and good editing, then I get sucked into that story. I get identified with the story or identify with a certain character in that story, and I'm no longer a witness. I become one with that story. That is the problem. So, as soon as we are born, we encounter this world around us. And it's a 3D movie. And of course, at that time, we don't even know what we were thinking, if we were thinking at all. We're just kind of taking it all in. And we inevitably find ourselves being involved, being a part of this cosmic drama or a cosmic play or this big movie that is continuously going on in and around us. What these two verses, 8th and 9th, say is that everything that is happening inside me and outside me, can I remember that I'm just watching it? That I'm not a part of the story, I'm only a perceiver of the story. Not merely in what the things that are happening out. I mean, sometimes it's easy to be a witness. You're just sitting by your window and you see people walking on the street outside, or you see cars passing by, that time we don't get so much involved. It's a little bit easier to say, well, I'm just a witness. I'm just watching the stuff that is happening on the streets outside. But it's not so easy to have that same witness attitude to what's going on in my own mind, because that just seems to be me. So what I am doing is really my body that is doing, and I can be a witness of what my body is doing. When I am thinking, it's actually an activity of the mind, and I can be a witness of what my mind is doing. So the more I am able to remain as a witness, that is what these verses say, the more detached I become. The body and mind will continue to do what they do, because those are creatures of habit. So if I have instilled a good physical discipline on myself, a good mental discipline, then the body will do what it is habituated to doing. The mind will do what it is habituated to doing. And so if I can create that kind of a discipline, a physical and mental discipline, then they will continue. They don't really need too much intervention from my side. It's a little bit like, well, think about a pet. If you have got a dog, cats are unpredictable, but dogs, if you have trained your dog well, then you don't have to do much. In fact, you can just watch and enjoy the antics of your dog. But if the dog has not been trained, then those antics may be very expensive. It can be very stressful. It can be very frustrating. So look upon the body and mind as your pets, if you like. Sometimes people say, keep a dog or keep a cat and you will be so happy. And yes, I believe that. People, they do bring a lot of joy to people. But if we look upon our body and mind as our pets, and if we train them well, a well-trained, a well-disciplined body and mind can bring even greater joy than a well-trained dog or a cat. And once they are trained, all that I need to do is just be there, just watch what they are doing. And they will continue to do. If I'm trained them well, they will do the right thing. They will think the right thoughts. And if at some point they seem to not be able to do so, I can have just minimum intervention and put them on the right path. So it's a great blessing, it's a great joy to have a disciplined body and mind. Now, sometimes when we are growing up, in our childhood, the elders in the family or our teachers might help us in disciplining the body and mind. Sometimes when we are very young, we might even resent it a little bit, may not, because not understanding that it is for our own good. But after some time, when we grow up, there are not going to be too many people around to discipline us. So we must make the best use of that opportunity when we are growing up. But after a few years, we have to do that ourselves. There isn't anybody around who is going to now discipline us. And therefore, a spiritual seeker who is able to do that kind of work well is the one who becomes happy. Look at verses 27 and 28. Again, very helpful verses. Sparshan kritva bahirbahyan chakshushchaivantare bhruvoho pranapanau samau kritva nasabhyantaracharinav yatendriyamano buddhihi munir mokshaparayanaha vigatecha bhayakrodho yas sada mukta eva saha. Shutting out external objects, steadying the eyes between the eyebrows, restricting the even currents of prana and apana inside the nostrils, the senses, mind and intellect controlled, with moksha as the supreme goal, freed from desire, fear and anger, such a person of meditation is verily free forever. Now all of these things become possible when the body and mind are restrained and have been disciplined. Look at even the very first phrase, shutting out external objects. Sparshan kritva bahirbahyan. Now that's a major challenge for all of us who have attempted to do meditation. Because when we are meditating, we want to keep our externals out, keep the world out of the mind, so that the mind can be engaged with the spiritual ideal. But our inability to keep the world out, that the mind running after things that we call distractions, the mind running after them rather than holding on to the presence of the divine in our heart, that happens because of lack of discipline. That happens because the mind has not been trained. We are not able to maintain a certain posture, ideal for meditation. We are not able to hold that physical posture because the body has not been trained. So if I can take care of these things, a well-disciplined body and mind, free from prejudices, free from expectations, such a person can be free. Such a person is free from such dilemmas, whether I should do karma or I should follow the path of jnana. All these apparent contradictions dissolve when the body and mind become disciplined, controlled, when the mind is free from prejudice, when the mind is free from expectations, then the path forward becomes very clear. Right now, Arjuna is having all these doubts, and what Krishna, through these different tips, very practical tips, sprinkled throughout this book, Krishna is telling Arjuna that follow these things, and then the doubts in your mind will also go away. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. We'll have a 5-minute break now, and then we will take a look at the questions. All right?
प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावः दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सस्तुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनम् देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनिमीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती नृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैर्नदी कैवर्तककेशवः पाराशल्यवचः सरोजममलम् गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानककेसरम् हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम्। लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानम् मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजम् कलिमलप्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे। मूकम् करोति वाचालम् पङ्गुम् लङ्घयते गिरिम् यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुवन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः। ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुः सुरासुराः देवाय तस्मै नमः। ध्यानम् पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्। अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः। प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावः दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सस्तुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनम् देवकी परमानन्दम् कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। मकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलम् गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानककेसरम् हरिकथा सम्बोधना बोधितम् लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानम् मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजम् कलिमलप्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूकम् करोति वाचालम् पङ्गुम् लङ्घयते गिरिम् यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः सुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः ध्यानम्
Let's take a look at the questions. Could we draw a distinction between voluntary and involuntary work? Yes, of course. There has to be. Could one not try and reduce voluntary work? Seems to me voluntary work originates from desire. Well, if by involuntary work is meant the work that is happening without my direct knowledge or without my prompting, then yes, of course. For instance, now the circulation of the blood and all the things that are happening within the body, that's not something that we are willing it, that's just happening. And of course, we have to distinguish that from the work that we do prompted by our own ego, prompted by our own desire. Because there is a work done with the knowledge that I am doing it. There is a work which is prompted by motives, and there is really no motive per se in the function that our lungs and hearts do. They just do, and we want them to keep on doing. And so yes, we can make a distinction between the two. Is the idea of perfection in practice actually somewhat of a barrier to practice? I think the perfection in practice is the goal. We want to be perfect in whatever we do or whatever we think. But the very fact that we are talking about practice, especially in a spiritual life, the need for practice implies that we are not perfect. Because if I am perfect, I don't need to practice. Perfection doesn't, at least that is understood in Vedanta, perfection doesn't need practice itself. So the need for practice assumes that there is some imperfection. And because of that, the practice also will be imperfect. And as I said, if that imperfect practice is carried on with faith, with regularity, with earnestness, then through God's grace or through our own efforts, the imperfections will become less and less and less. And when the practice becomes perfect, we may not need that practice anymore. When realized saints like Ramakrishna interact in the world, are they seeing the apparent snake but know that is really a rope? Yes. Seeing the world is itself not a problem. The problem is seeing the world as real. And so, yes, Ramakrishna sees the world. Otherwise, how would he even talk to us? How would Ramakrishna be able to walk from one room to the next if the Ramakrishna didn't know where the door was? So, yes, they are seeing the world, they are seeing people, but they are seeing them not as absolutely real. That there is a deeper reality behind all these apparent names and forms around them. It seems that for a jnani, even karma is like performing jnana yoga, as even mental activity of jnana yoga is part of karma yoga. Yes, karma is karma only as long as there is a karta. So, again, going back to, say, the beating of the heart, we don't take credit for the beating of the heart because that is not something we do consciously. That is something that happens. I don't have the feeling that I am making the heart move. So similarly, for a jnani, there is this approach towards work, just as how we see presently these involuntary activities occurring within our body. That things happen, the body and mind keep on doing their things, but the jnani doesn't have the sense of karta, the agency of action. And because there is no agency of action, we cannot even speak about it as karma. Although, in the eyes of the ignorant, it might look like work. So, when Shankaracharya writes commentaries on all these Upanishads, or Ramakrishna does tell stories, or he teaches, to us it seems as if they are doing karma, but from their perspective, they are not really doing anything at all. If we manage to get dispassion in this world, would that mean that we automatically would not have compassion for others who are having a hard time? No, dispassion has nothing to do with lack of compassion. Dispassion is the word, although the word passion seems to have be present in both those words. Dispassion really means to not get overwhelmed by things in the world, to be in control of oneself. Odd as it may sound, that people who are dispassionate are the ones who have the greatest compassion. We might think that if I'm too much involved into the world, it is easier for me to feel compassion. But that's not always how it works in practice. The more I am involved into the world, the less dispassion I have, then my ego gets in the way. When my ego gets in the way, my own biases, my own prejudices get in the way. Compassion is still possible, but it gets clouded or it gets filtered through my own self-interests. On the other hand, a person who is dispassionate, who has no attachment to the world, has no self-interest in it. And that is why such a person is able to feel love, such a person is able to feel compassion to its fullest degree. So dispassion produces greater compassion. That's how it works. Next question. In the movie analogy, is everyone watching the same movie? Who controls which movie to watch? It looks like everyone is watching different movies. And the answer is, I don't know. I know what movie I am watching. I can only guess what movie you may be watching. The reason this is complicated is because we are already making certain assumptions which contradict the movie analogy. Because when I say with everyone watching the same movie, who is this everyone? Because in this movie analogy, there is no everyone. There is just me. Me who is watching a movie. Everything and everyone other than me is just a character in that movie. So there isn't really all these other people. So that analogy just breaks there. So if you're talking about the cosmic drama or the cosmic play, it implies that I'm the only one who is watching it. If we want to take into consideration all these other people, then I've already kind of become a part of the movie. And asking a question after becoming a part of the movie just doesn't work. For a beginner, trying to give up all expectations from the result of his work needs a conscious effort. Absolutely. It doesn't happen by itself. It will need conscious effort. And what kind of effort should we make to be able to give up all expectations? Some 2 or 3 insights might be helpful. First is to recognize that expecting anything from anyone is a completely useless activity. Expectation does not change the outcome. Whether I expect whether tomorrow the temperature is going to reach 95 or 100, or I expect or I hope that it doesn't become too warm, has nothing to do with what temperature there will be tomorrow. What will be, irrespective of my expectation. So, if we think carefully, we will find that any kind of expectation from anyone of any kind is a complete waste of energy and time. So that's the first thing. And second thing is, when I expect something, I've already tied myself down to it. Because if things don't happen the way I expect them to, I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be unhappy. So why should I set myself up for a possible disappointment or a possible anger or a possible frustration by expecting? If I don't expect anything, then things are going to happen anyway, one way or the other. So it's much, much helpful to stop expecting things because it doesn't accomplish anything at all. Okay, I think I need to qualify that observation with this, that all of what I said works perfectly with my expectations related to, from or about objects and things and people in the world. But expectation actually can be helpful if I relate it to my own self, if I relate it to my own spiritual ideal. For instance, instead of wasting my energy expecting that this person would do something for me or this group of people would do something for me. If I can say, I expect myself to become enlightened in this life. That kind of an expectation, in fact, provides a great motivation for me to work harder to attain my goal. So, expecting things from oneself is helpful, but expecting things from other people does not help in life. Whenever I have tried to close my eyes and concentrate, I fall asleep. How can I overcome this situation? Well, if you have difficulty falling asleep, then you already know what you should do. You already found a way to fall asleep. So, when you want to fall asleep, try to close your eyes and concentrate. But of course, this is not very helpful when you want to meditate. Let me say two things about it. That sleep is a natural event in our daily life, and that happens because of exhaustion. The body and the mind, when they get exhausted, they want some rest, and therefore sleep occurs. So when I'm trying to meditate, and when I close my eyes and try to concentrate, and if I fall asleep, one possible reason for that could be that I'm just too exhausted. The body and mind are so exhausted that they will not allow me to do anything other than just sleep. They will snatch the rest if I don't give that rest to them willingly. But a second reason could also be that I'm so much overcome by tamas, laziness, inertia, lack of interest in meditation, then that can also result in exhaustion and sleep. And so one has to try to look deeply within one's heart and to see whether it's just inertia, in which case just getting up and taking some brisk walk or some exercise might help. But if that is not the case, then it could merely be that I have not been able to convince myself of how important meditation is to me. We know that when we know something is important, we pay attention to it. When we are not convinced that something is important, we ignore it. So before we sit for meditation, if I can convince myself that this is important to me, it is as important to me as breathing. When people have difficulty breathing, nobody says, oh, I'm so exhausted by this trying to breathe, I'm just going to stop breathing. Nobody says that. No matter how difficult it is, no matter what kind of a respiratory ailment person might have, they breathe, they try to breathe nevertheless, in spite of all the difficulty, because they know breathing is important for their existence, for their life. Do I feel that way about my practice of prayer and meditation? That if I feel that meditation is as important to me as breathing, then no matter how difficult it is, no matter how imperfect it is, I would still do it. I will not want to do anything else. And I think these are some of the things to be kept in mind. When we pray for and have moksha as a goal, isn't that also a selfish thought? We are still thinking of our own freedom. I don't think that is selfish, because what kind of a self are we trying to pamper by wanting moksha? If it's the lower self, which is where we normally use the word selfish. I want things for myself, everything for myself. That is selfish. But wanting freedom really means I'm letting go of this little self and going back to the real self. I would not call that selfish. And a second reason to be kept in mind is people who have striven for moksha, people who have attained moksha as well, have in fact become very unselfish. So if we found that people who are enlightened, who sought their own freedom, are like the worst offenders and in practice of selfishness, then we might say, well, that's a bad idea. But our experience has been completely contrary. All these great ones whom we today worship as mystics and saints and realized ones, they strove for freedom. And what do we see? That it be very difficult to find more unselfish people than them. So that itself, I think, is enough of a proof that striving for one's own moksha is not a selfish activity. Practice of detachment. In the beginning, when one is in the phases of understanding and integrating this concept, does one find that the sorrows of life pierce you a little less? About detachment, we have to remember that it is primarily an internal process. Detachment might seem as if I'm detaching myself from the world, which is how the phrase often gets used. But detachment from the world is not possible unless and until I detach from the ego. So if I have a strong ego or a strong desire, then detachment doesn't occur. So although it might seem as if I'm detaching from people and things and stuff that is happening in the external world, the real detachment is occurring from my own, this little unripe ego, the little I. And therefore, it might seem as if the sorrows of the world might pierce less, but again, going by the experience of people who have practiced detachment, we see that they are able to feel the sorrows of others, and their intention and ability to go and help these people is more with the practice of detachment. So, more the detachment, greater the love. Less detachment, less love. So that's the connection we have to keep in mind. We will see the sensitivity to suffering that these people have who have practiced detachment. Their sensitivity is much higher because the loosening of the ego in the heart, one becomes sensitive to even the subtle movements that are occurring in our own heart. We become sensitive to our own subtle suffering and even become capable of experiencing the subtle joys in our own heart. So that sensitivity that we acquire to experience our own joy and suffering, that sensitivity also reflects in us seeing the joy as well as the sorrow in the world. So we are able to rejoice in the joy of others, and we are able to grieve in the sorrows of others when we have perfected ourselves in the practice of detachment. How does one develop dispassion towards difficult people with whom we have to live and work even if we have no expectations from them? If we have no expectations from them, then we have already developed dispassion towards them, because it's dispassion and lack of expectation goes together. So all that we can remind ourselves is that these people whom we see as difficult people, they are working out their own karma, they have their own set of samskaras, which is making them do, making them think in the way they think, the way they do, and they have to face the consequences of their own actions and their own decisions. And all that I have to do is hold on to my way of thinking, hold on to the positive good samskaras that I might have, that I keep on doing what is right, I keep on doing what is good, irrespective of what people around me do. If in some ways my doing what is right and good influences them and makes them also good, that's great. If it doesn't, that's too bad. But there is nothing you and I can do about it. Someone like Ramakrishna or some of these great saints, they might have the ability to change the lives of other people. One day we might acquire that ability ourselves. But right now, we need to use our energy, our willpower to change ourselves. And to the extent I succeed in changing myself, to the extent I succeed in making myself a better person, I might, either today or tomorrow or in future, might have some power to try to help change other people. But until then, we can just pray for them that people who are difficult may not be so difficult in the future. You see, even if people who are difficult might seem to be a source of misery for us, it's also good to remember that people who are difficult, and if they are really difficult, then they are a greater source of misery to themselves. Often it's the lack of peace and lack of contentment in their own heart that manifests in the way they behave, trying to take away the peace and contentment of other people as well. So while we don't always have the ability to change them, we must at least have the ability to protect ourselves from such influences. The next question. You spoke about our ability to train our mind and body, that we can train our mind to think the correct thoughts. In an earlier talk, you spoke about the basement of the mind from where thoughts bubble up. How to train the basement or that part of the mind which isn't in our conscious level? Very good question. A detailed discussion of this we can find in Swami Vivekananda's book called the Raja Yoga, which essentially deals with how the mind functions and how we can purify the mind, how we can make the unconscious part of the mind conscious. So we don't have time to go into detail, but I would strongly recommend that you read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, and you might get some ideas in there about it. And going forward, this discussion will come up and we can discuss it in greater detail that time. While meditating, we sometimes experience great joy. Can this experience of joy be considered a worldly attachment to the senses? The joy that we get in meditation is not coming from the senses. It's a joy that is coming up from within. And therefore, I would not call it a joy of worldly attachment. But having said that, it's also good to remember that when I'm meditating, if I am feeling a great joy, and many of us will sooner or later experience that joy, it is helpful to ignore that joy while you are meditating. Because sometimes it's very tempting. Someday you have a good meditation, you're sitting peacefully, and you're experiencing this great joy, and you just say to yourself, oh, how fortunate I am. Today, finally, after days of struggle, today I'm having a good meditation. That kind of thinking is not helpful. Because the moment that thought enters into my mind, effectively my meditation has already stopped. Because I'm no longer thinking of God, I'm thinking of the joy in my mind. And so therefore, such joy, such peace will be experienced by every serious meditator. But the trick is to not dwell on it. Now we might say, oh, well, what's the point then? Well, the point is, let me finish my meditation for that day, and then it's not that I'm going to forget the joy. So later on, I can be very grateful, I can be happy, I can relish the great meditation I had that day, but to not do it while you are meditating. In fact, that kind of dwelling on the joy of meditation while one is meditating is considered a great obstacle in meditation. It's called rasa aswadanam. Rasa is that joy, that taste. Aswadanam. So trying to taste the joy while you are meditating. And so that effectively stops the meditation. And so joy will come. I do not consider that a joy as a result of a sensual joy coming from the world, but it's problematic if I try to relish it, try to enjoy it while I'm meditating. I often struggle to engage with current activities or world as an observer rather than a participant. Some days it seems better to stop news altogether, but it feels like it's too easy way out. No, I don't think it's too easy way out. I think the news, to see the news or not, or how much news to see, I don't think that is a problem in itself, but how much I am attached to what I see, and how much my mind can take in without getting overwhelmed by it. Because I think shutting out the news is, if someone can do it and if someone is happy with it, they can go ahead and do that. But I don't think the news itself is a problem. It might also seem that it's not a bad idea to be aware, to be aware of what's happening in the world around us. But if I find that I'm consuming news to such an extent that it is affecting my ability to do the other things that I need to do in life, if I'm so overwhelmed by oftentimes very depressing or infuriating stuff that is happening around us, and that feeling, that anger or that frustration seeps into my prayer, into my meditation, into whatever other duties I have, then I'm probably consuming more news than I'm able to digest. So my advice would be open to the world, but only as much open as you can digest it. Because if I'm not able to digest all the sensory input I get from the world, then there's going to be indigestion. And if there's indigestion, then that's no fun. That's always problematic. Is compartmentalizing the right way when one is going through a difficult situation and one's mind is going through negative emotions? Compartmentalizing might be a stopgap solution, might help in certain cases, but that's only a very temporary solution. Eventually, all compartments have to go away. Eventually, all the walls need to be broken. So yes, compartmentalization might help, but I do not consider that to be a perfect solution. Are most of us hypocritical to some extent or other in varying degrees because we can't practice what we know? No, hypocrisy doesn't mean not being able to practice. Hypocrisy would mean that not being able to practice but pretending as if we can. Authenticity doesn't mean perfection. Authenticity means even if I'm imperfect, I acknowledge that imperfection, I'm aware of that imperfection, and I'm trying to get over it. I'm trying to overcome it. So, just because I'm not able to practice what we know, that doesn't make me a hypocrite. It would make me a hypocrite if I pretend that I am practicing everything that I know. So pretension is the problem, not imperfection. So here is a comment. I wanted to share a saying I heard that might be useful. Faith is like an orange. Most people see the outer peel, the one of discipline, and may not like that. But that peel is important to protect the spiritual life. Without the peel, the pulp will rot. I think that's a great analogy. That if we want to eat the orange, we need to remove the peel. The peel covers the stuff that is inside. So, disciplining oneself, people like to discipline others, not so much discipline themselves. So, disciplining ourselves might seem tough, but unless we do that, we won't be able to get the real stuff, the faith that is within. So, thank you for that, sharing that analogy. There is this. Again, this is not like a very generalized rule, but they say that oftentimes it is seen that people who are strict with themselves, people who value disciplining themselves, value self-discipline, are generally very liberal people, are generally very forgiving people, are people who understand the challenges of disciplining and therefore are willing to forgive the shortcomings of others. And the opposite is there are people who expect perfection from others, who want to discipline others, want everything to be perfect. And oftentimes they are not that much out of their concern is not so much their own perfection. Oftentimes they are very lax in their own personal lives, but they expect perfection from others. And the opposite is people who are very focused on being perfect are generally very liberal. Again, this is not a very generalized observation. I mean, there are obviously exceptions to this, but oftentimes this is what is seen. So, as spiritual seekers, we must first set our own house in order. We must first make sure that everything is all right here. Only then we can look outside and see how we can help. And those of us who have known how difficult it is to change ourselves, those of us who know the challenges involved in removing some of our bad habits, will then have a greater compassion, greater understanding when we see other people struggling with overcoming their own shortcomings. Then we will be more forgiving because we know the challenges that are involved. So lots to discuss, and thank you for these very good questions and good ideas. So as we do every year, we will now have a short summer recess. So next time we will have the satsang, and I imagine it will still be an online satsang. This pandemic is not showing any signs of disappearing soon. So we will meet again on the Sunday after the Labor Day weekend. So probably that will be sometime in mid-September. So until then, I would encourage you to, whenever you find time, to just look at your copy of the Gita, go through some of these verses, some of the ideas that have come up during our discussions, try to reflect on it. Clearly, there is so much to discuss about every subject, and we are not able to do justice to every idea in these brief conversations that we have. But when you dwell on it and relate these ideas to your own specific life situation, a lot more ideas will come to you, a lot more insights will come to you. The Gita is such a profound book that even every little bit of reflection shows us a way forward. And even if we don't understand something clearly or perfectly, we spoke a lot about imperfect practice today. So even if we understand something not perfectly, but we strive to put it into practice, even an imperfect understanding with an imperfect practice might yield results which may not always be perfect, but those results will be enough for us to know where we should change, how we can improve. So continue to think, continue to practice, and life itself will teach us. Life teaches us more than any lecture, any retreat, any book. So we have to become students of life, students of not just the book Gita, students of not just learning through lectures and retreats, but students of life itself. If you are willing to learn, every day we will have hundreds of opportunities to learn. From people and from situations we might never have thought would have anything to teach. Maybe you speak with a little child, and the child may say something, and if I'm there, alert, willing to learn, sometimes profound truths come from the words of children. They themselves may not realize it, but we who are good students might be able to learn from it. We might be able to look at animals, we might be able to look at nature. If you're willing to learn, there are hundreds and thousands of ways we will have opportunities to learn. So let's continue to do that going forward. And so satsang we'll have in mid-September. We will continue to try to improve and add content to the center's website. Some of you have already seen that we have a new feature now called Vivekananda Tour. And at present we have 2 places covered. Swami Vivekananda when he came to Cambridge, and then Gloucester, and Annisquam and Magnolia and the North Shore area. And so going forward, we will add more places there. So right now, travel is difficult. So at least we can do an online visits to these places. And then when things will improve, as they surely will, whenever it is possible, and if any of these places are near or within reach of you are traveling there, I would encourage you to go and see these places. Because when we see these places, even from a distance, life of a prophet, life of a Vivekananda, then becomes somehow more real. Otherwise, it just becomes just ideas in our head. But when we see some concrete places where an enlightened being like him moved and talked and met with people, it has a big impact. So whenever you get an opportunity in life, wherever you may be traveling, if you are able to go to a place of pilgrimage, any place of pilgrimage, where you know that these children of God, these special people whom we worship as saints and mystics and prophets and incarnations, that they have lived and moved, if we get a chance to visit those places, do so, because the benefit that we get is very subtle, but is very real, and they have the ability to change our lives for the better. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधा